4 per sicurezza. Grazie. Niente.
Laurie, it's possible to photo?
Good morning, welcome everyone. Thank you for being so numerous. This is quite a sight. And once again, I want to thank Laurie Anderson from the bottom of the heart for being here today in Locarno, for accepting our Vision Award Ticinomoda. And there's a lot to be talked about, and I'm grateful to Rossano Lomele, the editor of Italy's longest running music magazine, to speak, that he accepted the invitation to be here today. We will not speak only about music, but of the overall arc of Laurie Anderson's body of work. So with no further ado, I'll leave the floor to Laurie and Rossano. Have a great conversation.
So once again, thank you, and thank you so much for being here with us. And I'd like to start from the very beginning, because you were born in Chicago, which is a kind of megalopolis. But let's say very early you decided to move somewhere. So I'd like to start from your memories, your first memories, and why did you decide to move to New York City?
Good morning. I guess my first memory, in a way, is some light. I do remember some light, some kind of stuff in front, and I think I'm parked in my little buggy carriage in the front yard. This is my very first memory, and I remember bright sky. So this, and then something in the front. So this is Chicago, and in the after the war, and so the next memory I have really is crying, a lot of crying, because my uncle, one of my uncles, I had many uncles, and he came back from World War II, and he was what you would call now PTSD or serious problems. He was like, he had shell shock. And the army didn't do anything with people at that time. They said, just go home to your family. So he came to us, and he lived in the attic. And my Uncle Al, for 3 years, he screamed all the time. So this was a big memory of my childhood, is hearing him crying and crying and crying. And so, and we all got used to it. We liked him very much. He should never have been in the army. He was a very fragile guy. He should never have gone to fight. And then they said, something happened to your Uncle Al in France. And I was like, from then on, I thought France was something where you shouldn't go, It was dangerous, something could happen to you, you would come back crying, So anyway, eventually, he stopped crying. And eventually, he got married and had a family, and that was a big thing for us, for our family. So it was. I don't know why I haven't thought of my Uncle Al in a very long time, but and I don't usually go trotting back to my old days in my crib, but here I am. So anyway, I did want to go to New York because Chicago has no ocean. We have a lake, a small lake. We call the Great Lakes, Great Lakes. It's a small lake. And so I wanted to go because New York seemed so super exciting. Also, the name of Chicago is the second city. Okay, so that already, you want to go to the first city, So the first city was New York City, and it was a port. So I wanted to go where there was people coming in from other places. This was interesting to me, that there would be people. And it was also very egalitarian. Even as a kid, I knew that if you came to New York, wherever you come from India, you come from South America, you would be accepted as a New Yorker. You would be a New Yorker. And I really liked that it wasn't as provincial as my hometown. It accepted everybody, so that's why I went.
Okay. We all know the genius behind Laurie Anderson, your name, and I'd like to know if you consider yourself, as an artist, a person who mostly worked on her own or helped by other people?
Oh, well, I'm a loner, but I love working with people as well. So when I began to do touring, I realized, why are there always 8 people in the tour, 8 key people, like a lighting designer and a tech person and the tour manager, always 8. And I was like, wait a second, I am one of 8 kids, and so I'm trying to probably replicate my family situation in my work life, minus mom and dad, of course. They don't get to come. So working with my siblings, I grew up working with my siblings, doing all sorts of projects, puppet shows. We had a big room where we worked. It was just goofing around, making things, and very, very big floor-to-ceiling map of the world. And I remember that very well. Also, when we were making stuff, we were looking at this world. We were roller skating a lot in this room. So we would roller skate around. It was a big room, roller skating around the room. And so I should say I grew up in a family that had a lot of money. And this was my big advantage of being a rich kid, was I saw very early in my life, rich people are not very happy. So this is a great advantage to know.
Why do you say that?
Well, I'm just saying that they were not happier than normal people, other people, than poor people. They were not happier than poor people, necessarily. They were not. And I could see that very well. They were like, boo, and they were always wanted more. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to spend my life trying to go there. No way. That's not, when I see other people who are happier and, they're not trying to hold on to their stuff, So that was the biggest advantage to me of being from a family like that. Anyway, so we're skating around in a really big room, and whoosh, the world is going by like this all the time. And of course, on this big map, in the middle is the United States, of course. And Everest is cut and moved to the side, you have like, so Europe's over there, China's over there. But what's on either side of the United States are these two little islands. They look a lot alike. They look like little boots. And one is England and one is Japan. And we said, okay, so who lives on these islands? So they're like, well, the people who live on those islands they have kings and queens, and they love flowers, and they have big navies, and they're very sexually repressed, and they are very super formal, and they love royalties, And I was like, whoa, okay. So we felt we had an understanding of the world by these two boots, like bookends to the United States. Okay, so this is, you grow up thinking you live in the center of the world, of course, So this was a little bit of it was a kind of a cool childhood. I had a lot of fun with my siblings, and so they were. So as I said, when I started working, I tried to, I think, rebuild that sense of fun that you have with a team. And many of you who are filmmakers know what I mean by that, of you get a team together and you work to hammer out your ideas. And people can be a difficult situation. It can also feel very democratic and very fun-filled. So that's not always the case, but you always try for that,
So how was playing live music, the ordinary days, with this team of people?
Well, so many different ways. When we started doing, my first band was called the Fast Food Band, and I had a really wonderful cellist. You might know him, Arthur Russell, a very soulful musician, and none of us had really done music, so we were just making it up and improvising.
Still talking about other artists, you met and had the opportunity to know and work with people like John Cage, William Burroughs, Frank Zappa. I'd like to know if they somehow helped your artistic view or your career.
I never met Frank Zappa.
Okay. Sorry.
I'm sure he helped me for sure, because he was made these very jagged shapes. I loved his shapes. They were not going rude, so I was coming from the arpeggio world of diddle 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 fill glass, and the sort of drone-like meditation music, really drone music, and which I still love very, very much. I mean, I do a lot of things with drones, and the work that I'm just starting now is very drone-based, with melodic things on top, but very related to like 60 cycle hum, just the electrical grids, something that's holding you in. But teachers are are so important to me. I've had the greatest teachers, and I really feel so lucky. Well, since you mentioned John Cage, it was I spent a lot of time with him doing an interview, and we were doing an interview supposedly for a magazine called Tricycle, which is a Buddhist magazine, and so we were supposed to talk about, well, Buddhism really. So I went over there to John's place, and he lives on 6th Avenue, and we spent most of the time like this, you know. 6th Avenue is going by, and you know, and it was I understood gradually what he meant by music and by attention, and also the thing I loved about John was he was always smiling. He was like like that, you know. I was just so, you know, there's so many people when they're old people are like they've had it, you know. They're like, oh, you know, they're sad and depressed, you know, and they just you know. So he was not like that, and I was always wondering, how do you do this, you know? How do you do this? And of course, you can't ask somebody something like that. It's, you know, how do you do this? You know, it's so. So we just sat there, and I asked him in a very oblique way how he did that, because I was just trying to see really what he thought of progress and how he went from being the young John Cage to this guy who was like, let's listen to the traffic. How did you go there? How did you get there? I wanted to know that. And so without asking that, I went through this ridiculous, long thing about progress and evolution. Do you think things get better? I really wanted to say, are things getting better, or getting worse in general, not just in his own life, but in general? What's the trajectory of where we're going? You know, because now, more than then, the story is down, you know, and so which way did he think? And so I was just going on about using examples like sometimes, a modern horse is more efficient than a prehistoric horse. It runs faster, it's more efficient, it's better, it's not falling over as often. Other things that we are generally getting, having longer lives, this kind of thing. And then other times, you know, things didn't go so well because it would have been, you know, more advantageous for an animal like a dinosaur to have developed that could be a fire-breathing, like cook its own food. You know, that would have been a very efficient thing to do, but that didn't develop. And he's like, "What are you trying to say? You know, what are you talking about? The fire-breathing animals didn't evolve." And he said, "I just want to know whether you think things are getting better or worse." And he said, and he didn't pause for very long, and he said, "Oh, better, much better." I was like, "Oh, okay." And he seemed to have a lot of confidence in this. And so I just decided, for no good reason, I'm going to have that confidence. And based on zero, in fact, based on the evidence to the contrary, that so I'll just try to, I will see things in that way. And in fact, of course, we are, in general, if you look at evolutionary principles, we are going up the evolutionary scale. We're becoming more complex. We're not sliding slowly back down to go on all fours and then go back down in flippers and become pond slime at the bottom of the ocean. We're going the other way. The other way. So where is it that we are going? And how can we understand that well? And use this energy to go farther that way. So anyway, he was a wonderful teacher. Saul LeWitt was also my sculpture teacher, and he was wonderful with young artists. He would just give such great advice, and one of the best pieces of advice he would give was, do your worst work. And this was, what? You know, people are, what? I want to do my best work. I want to be, you know, do the best. They said, no, do your worst work. You're like, okay. So, and of course, what he meant by that was that by doing your worst work, you would find out your rules, what you think is good, what you think is the best work you could do, and you understand those rules. And then by breaking them, sometimes you free yourself, and you realize that your worst work, you weren't sitting there worrying, is that my voice? Is that good enough? Is that sharp enough? Is it current enough? Is it political enough? Is it mystical enough? No, you're just saying, I want to do my worst work. See what happens. I guarantee that if you try this, it will at least be very interesting, you know, and it might turn out to be something that has a kind of freedom that you always wanted, you know, and that you couldn't give to yourself. So he was really great at that. His own work, of course, is full of rules, you know. So it was funny, but. And then I was looking at some of his number series that his work is based on, and I said, that really looks like music, and he said, make some. So I made a quartet based on that number series called Quartet for Saul LeWitt, and then that's also the basis of a new orchestra piece that I have that's going to be performed in Linz in a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks. And we're going to play that piece and it's based on his number series, and open fifths for the violin. You know, it's like a kind of an obvious sort of way to progress through sequences. So, but now I did play this quartet in Masmoka, where there's a big installation of Saul's work. Now, I do not believe in ghosts, although I have seen 3 ghosts, although I don't believe in them. Okay, so when we're playing this quartet, suddenly there was Saul. He was there. And I don't know what about music and numbers and ghosts, but they are related, I'll tell you. So anyway, suddenly he was there, and it was fine. And then he was gone. But I think music has this, music works on some other frequencies that are very, very interesting. So anyway, I'm very grateful to Saul LeWitt and to, I don't know, just countless other people who, because I look for teachers. I actively look for people. I look around and see who knows something, and I just go and try to ask them. I try to ask them, I'm kind of like a dog, you know. It's like, you know, because they have something that I recognize, which is a kind of empathy that many animals have, and many people have. And you know when you see, you know, somebody, and so I just kind of go, please, could I tell me something about what you know? So I think this, that's a frequency that doesn't work electronically very well. That's a frequency that works in person, I find. You know, that you can see a little bit electronically through visual things and through audio things, but really it's about being in person. So all these people who are my teachers are people that I knew in person. So I think that's a great thing about festivals and things where people have to show up in person, you know, because then you get the vibe, you know. So otherwise you're just learning kind of intellectually and kind of not emotionally as you do when you're with people. So I think that's a major part of the suffering of the pandemic really was the lack of physical contact with others, and so people tended to withdraw because they and then just stay on the phone after the whole thing. So I'm so happy that there are public events that are happening again, because I think it's very important to be in groups of human beings that are not mediated by electronics.
Okay, you were talking about teachers. Now I'd like to talk about a masterpiece, Big Science. So let's go back to the beginning of the 80s. How did you approach that album? I mean, working, writing.
The record Big Science was not meant to be a record. It was. I was doing a lot of performances in the scene, in the live scene of New York. So it was like, and we all were making music and doing stuff, and so I would write new songs for each event, and there was. We would do, we would do not just club things, but we would do benefits for various things. It was kind of a political moment as well. And so there were often things that had a purpose, let's say. And then there were just festivals that were for fun. And then there were, so I had no interest really in making a record, but somebody, because people from the record companies would come to these things that we were doing, and they would like be looking around for their next, Beastie Boys or whoever they are, and to sign, so they said, "Would you like to make a record for Warner Brothers?" And I said, "No way, I'm not." I mean, the thing is, I was a snob, I didn't want to make a pop record. I thought the pop world was idiotic. It was just, I had no interest in, and I had my scene, I had my heroes, and I had all these people, I loved their music, and we were quite, in a way, it had come from the 60s. It was not, the 70s was not so far from the 60s, which was a very communal and democratic era, and very politically motivated. So, and people would help each other. We would help each other, and so we would work together as a group. And this was, I tend to idealize this a little bit, but not that much, because it really was a very special moment. Not one person in that group, and I'm talking now about, let's see, Phil Glass, Trisha Brown, Gordon Matta Clark, just about 20 of us, let's say. And first of all, we never ever thought we would make a living from what we were doing. Never. This was just something that we were doing, and there was no idea that we could. We all had jobs, and so we did this for that reason. Anyway, so to cut it a little bit shorter, rather than wander around in the commune for a while, I did get a $500 grant from the National Endowment for the Arts, and I decided to make my own record and sell it for like I think $1, a 45, and it was called "Oh Superman." It was a record that I put out, and people would call me up and say, "Can you send me a record?" And I would say, "What's your name? What's your address?" And then I would put the record in a package, and I'd walk to the post office, which was a couple blocks from my studio, and mail the record.
Are you talking about a 45 RPM
45
vinyl?
Yeah, 45
okay,
vinyl, and it was fine. had time on my hands. And then I got a call one day from a guy named John Peel, and he said, "My name's John Peel, and I need some records." I said, "Great. How many do you need?" And he goes, "I need 40,000 Friday, and I need 40,000 more on Monday." And I was like, "Right." And I looked at my record stack of like maybe 12, and so I called the Warner Brothers and I said, I need your help you to help me out on this thing of like press some records for me. And they're like, "That's not how we do things at Warner Brothers Records and Tapes. You sign an 8 album contract." I was like, 8 albums? What are you talking about? I said, "Fine, I'll sign it." So I was just trying to be practical. So we put out so they said, "Okay, when you," and actually the thing was, I really liked these guys. They were real.
You mean people at Warner?
Yes, they were serious music lovers. Bob Regier, in particular, was a wonderful guy. We had so much fun. I remember he came here to Switzerland with me once when I was playing, and he just said, "I'll come along now." And I was like, "Oh, I'm going to bring a record company with me now on a tour." But it didn't seem like that because he was such a wonderful guy. And so he said, "Well, put together a whole album." I said, "Okay," put some other songs on it. Now, that was that. That was how that was happening. And so it had a kind of unintentional, sort of haphazard way that it happened. But I wasn't sorry I did it, really. I didn't feel like, wow, I'm selling out of my avant-garde, world. I didn't feel like because they were genuinely music lovers. They really. Now, some of them weren't because some of them would come to recording sessions. I said, "No, you don't really." These guys like to sit in the back of a recording session, and they just say pointless things like, "I think there should be more bass on that track," and you're like, "There isn't any bass on the track."
That's the music industry.
Yeah, it's the music industry. So, but there were a lot of things like birds on my tracks, and I think they would have felt silly saying, "I think there should be like more birds on that one." that would put it over the top, because these, they're selling records, and so I didn't hold it against them. They were fine. They were easy to ignore. And they would get easily bored also. They'd drift off, so anyway.
So, I mean, your debut album was, can we call it a success? Unexpected, probably. How do you judge it nowadays? Because, I mean, it recently turned 40.
Yeah, I probably don't judge it because this is probably the only time I think about stuff like this is when somebody asks me about it. Otherwise, it's too long ago. And really, my debut album was something called New Music for Electronic and Recorded Media, and it was like a compilation of art things. And it was a lot of electronic music for... Now there's a really interesting film, I don't know if you saw it, it came out last year, called Sisters with Transistors, and it's a fantastic film, and it's the story of, it's my story really, of going around in the 70s with electronics and being in electronic music festivals, and they were mostly women, actually. Christina Kubish, Eliana Redig, I mean, many people who you might not have heard of, but that was a very big scene, and so I am very grateful that this film was made because, and I hope you get a chance to see it sometime. It's called Sisters with Transistors, and it's also the story of one of my great heroes, Pauline Oliveros, and she does music that she calls deep listening. It's very beautiful. It's, again, heavily drone music, a lot of electronics and drones, and it's her, is it her 90th birthday? I think 90th. This year. She died a couple of years ago, but now we're doing an event in her honor because she's well, there are a number of publications. I've been writing a lot about her work lately, and there's a publishing house called Ignota in London that is pushing the work of some of these unknown, particularly electronic women composers, of which there are many, you know, and it's a whole genre of music that nobody really kind of knows. So that was my scene, and my first music came out that way, in the so-called underground, which has remained underground apparently. So anyway, what we're doing now is connecting Pauline's work to some things that are happening politically in the United States. We are now still in the middle of some hearings that are about January 6th, our coup, our almost coup, and these hearings are very intense, very interesting, and they are accounts of what happened when the Capitol building was stormed by the Proud Boys and a number of groups that are ready to do it again, I'll tell you, and armed, heavily armed. We are very, very concerned about this, and so listening to the hearings is kind of mind-blowing. Here's one thing, though. The hearings are run by a woman, and most of the testimony is done by women. Most of the men who are called to testify in 50s, 60s, 70s, men, mostly in power, always invoke executive privilege, and they do not talk. They do not talk. Who talks? The women are talking. The assistants to these guys are saying, yes, that did happen, and yes, and they fill it in. What's happening to them now is their careers are being destroyed. They are called mentally incompetent. They are all getting death threats. Meanwhile, I've been very aware and disturbed that more artists in the United States aren't saying anything. We're afraid. It is really a very tense and crazy situation. Now, at what point should artists enter the fray, into the political world? Well, one of my deepest tenets is freedom, and freedom of speech. I'm somebody who is telling stories. This is basic to what I do. So when I see this happening to people who are telling their stories, anyway, what we're going to do is a big event, and we're trying to find it in the biggest place possible, and connecting Pauline Oliveros' work with deep listening to the series of hearings, so-called hearings, which are about hearing and speaking, and dedicated to supporting these women who are really risking their lives, because these death threats aren't a joke. You know, these guys come over and they try to kidnap people, and they try to like sweep away the governor, and they had a plan to kill her. I mean, it's not good there. It's not good what's going on in that place. It's getting to be quite dangerous, and so I think that it's a really interesting and important moment for artists, not just artists, all citizens. I mean, I don't think artists have any bigger obligation to be citizens than people who are delivering the mail or serving the food, or, you know, we all have an obligation to look at what's going on and speak out. Artists have the extra tools to be able to do something. So, and you as filmmakers who are, no, I don't have to tell you this, you know, you look at the world around you and you want to, you know, make a story, show it, show how it works. What is this, you know, how does this happen? What's the energy there? And you try to, not turn it into art necessarily, but hold it up to look at it. So that's what we're trying to do. I think art can change the world is something I can never really answer very well, but I do know that I always, when people ask me that, I always think of Bob Dylan, and when he started writing songs about losers, you know, and I was just like, oh, I love this guy because, you know, we're all losers, you know, and so he kind of romanticized being a loser, and you're like, okay, it's cool to be a loser. This is great, you know, and so it helps you feel more for other people, and that's what politics is. That's what music is. That's what life is. So, you know, now I feel so stupid saying that. Just cancel what I just said. But it is kind of like that. So I and it's really just lately. After, you know, the pandemic sleep that we're all in, that I've really been thinking again how to engage with what's going on in the world, and not to pretend that it's not going on. It's going on. So I sometimes wish it would just be easier to, you know, make music and shut the door and ignore the helicopters, you know, you know, but it's not. Actually, I hadn't seen this movie, Heart of a Dog, that I made a few years ago, and I just remember this cut to a helicopter, and it was, you know, when you look at your old films, you kind of forget what the cut was, and you go, good cut. That was a really good cut. It was a seamless cut from, you know, life in New York to suddenly, wow, there are cameras everywhere, and then the helicopter comes up, you know. Anyway, it's I guess this jump cut to politics was about about that. I just had to say that.
We were just talking about an album, then we...
Yeah. But an album called Big Science, about technology, about what it does to our lives. So, you know.
Just another thing about that album. Can you somehow explain why Oh Superman became such a hymn, so popular around the world? What's peculiar about that song?
Well, the song is a prayer. It was for Massenet. It was based on au souverain, it was au souverain, au juge, au père, and it was a song about power and justice. And I thought, how could I shift that around to look at through that same filter at what was happening with power and technology and nationhood, really. So and it was just on the cusp. This was back in the Reagan days, just when when that world was being defined and built. And I'm talking about you know, kind of reality capitalism. One of my favorite books is the Mark Fisher book that begins with the words, it's easier for people to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. And, you know, when I talk to young artists especially, they have no idea that there was another way to live in the world other than branding, moving forward, getting your thing out, go, go, go. And so, and this kind of world so full of ambition and pressure. and so I always try to, I mean, you can't remind somebody of a world that they didn't know existed, you know. And so I when I was a kid, really was more interested in radicalism, in political radicalism, than in art at that point. You know, I was doing a lot of things that were, you know, connected to SDS and social justice. So my interest in what technology is doing to people had a basis in that sort of radical world. Now that I've been reminded of that recently because there's a series of podcasts of my friend's son. And it's a really beautiful podcast if you want to check it out. It's free on Apple. It's called Mother Country Radicals. And it's the story of the Weathermen, who are my friends, and actually who I grew up with. For some reason, our little town in the Midwest near Chicago was a hotbed of future radicals. There were a lot of the Weathermen were from that little town, and they decided that they would try to change the world, and hooked up with the Black Panthers. And these are also kids who are like the kids of like bankers and people like me from my family, who were like not very likely radicals. But we decided we would. We lived in Chicago where there's a lot of black people, and we felt solidarity with them, and we wanted to. And they were getting shot all the time. It's coming back now in another form, half a century later, but the kind of racism that's endemic to the United States is built in, and it has been there for a long time, and well, hundreds of years, and so Americans are now trying to deal with that and understand what it is. But its relationship to technology and power and justice has always really interested me. And that record, Big Science, was about those things, and in ways that were slightly oblique. I mean, I'm not somebody who's pounding you over the head with my ideas. I mean, I don't have any right to do that to people. I really hate, I don't do it because I hate it when people tell me what to do. People tell me what to do and I say, you don't even know me. Don't tell me what to do. So I really, really would rather wither up and die than tell anybody what to do. So I'm an artist, so I make some things about what I think and take it or leave it. You can take it or leave it. So, but I do try to see things from other points of view than just my own. So I remember as a student trying to really see what it would be like to be powerless. As a woman, I have a great advantage because we know what that means already. So this is, it's a great advantage for women artists because we can have a lot of different points of view that way as well.
Yesterday,
women right on.
Yesterday we had a very quick conversation about social media, and I'd like to know what do you think about students and young people discovering your art through social media nowadays?
Well, what was so interesting, what is so interesting about a film festival is big. It's big, and you see things big, and sometimes when they were designed to be big, not everything's designed to be big, but for example, this film I did, Home of the Brave, which really was intensely embarrassing for me to look at because you look at yourself going, hey, wow, it's pretty horrible, so you just kind of go, it gives me a lot more sympathy for young people now because I just realized what an idiot I was as a young person. Kind of like, and I didn't even think of that. I just thought, this is fun, this is good, this is music, this is, and I didn't think, what does that look like to other people? Like, stop, So anyway, for me, the advantage was kind of feeling more like empathy for the enthusiasm of young artists, which is great. I mean, it's great. It's just ridiculous amount of enthusiasm, let's say. And so, but anyway, each time I saw that film, which was very rarely over the last almost 40 years or something, it looked worse. So it started out as 35 millimeter film, and I was determined to make it look like a beautiful film. Okay, so the next time I saw it, was ready for Laserdisc, and you're going, oh, that doesn't look that great. And then ready for videotape, VHS, that looks pretty bad. Looks like somebody is knitting the whole image, and kind of like in a really crude knitting pattern. You're like, oh, that looks. And then finally, it's on the phone. You're going, whoa, is that a movie, or is that just some colors screwing around on the screen? So as filmmakers, I'm sure you know what I mean. That you make something for one medium, and then it just goes into these other shapes, and if it depends on those things like size and texture and color and sheen and all of those things that many of us love as filmmakers, then it's just heartbreaking to see it become something really sad and shabby, But now, fortunately, a lot of people who are making images now make them for their phone. And that's what it's supposed to look like. So I admire young filmmakers, especially ones who want to make things for nothing. I love cheap. It's like, because it's so hard to raise money, as all of you know, and it's so satisfying to then say, okay, I'm going to make something where I can do it maybe on my iPhone. And for me, stories are everything. Stories are where it's at. And then I realized how my own rules were ridiculous, because you reminded me of the name of that Portuguese film. What is the name of that Portuguese film about Lisbon that's in this festival? Does anyone know? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, I didn't know the story of the film, that it was, had a lot of references to a previous film in the 60s. I was oblivious to that. And I saw a beautiful film that was so empty. There was nothing going. It was like I saw a film for the first time. It was like suddenly you're just in this big park in Lisbon at night with these huge trees, and it's dark and it's kind of thundery, and the camera moves slowly through the park, and you're like, where am I? What is this? It was, it had the meaning, let's say, of your dreams when you're suddenly in a place that's very real and you don't know what it means, and because we're meaning machines, we try to give some meaning to what does this mean? Is there a story? There was no story. There were no people. I was like, this is genius. This is breaking every rule I thought I had about what's a good story, what's a blah, 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 blah. So this is the thing I treasure about being at a place like this, at a festival, where you're showing so many different ways to see the world. This was just a revelation to me, to see to just sink into these amazing places, and I didn't know why I was there. It was very much like life, You're just like, why am I here? Why am I looking at that thing right now? The camera moves over there, and you're looking at it, and there's no story reason to be looking at it. You're just using your eyes in a way that's very, very primitive, and it connects you to a part of yourself that's very intuitive, and how I think of just, that we as human beings have all these skills, some of which are atrophying because we are so screen-based now, screen-based this way, that, for example, like you're in an elevator and somebody's behind you, and you just get this feeling, like the hair on the back of your neck is just kind of going, like there's somebody behind you who does not wish you well. This feeling, and you get this woo, and I think it's it's what I think our ancestors were very good at. They get this feeling like something behind them is, and then there's a giant dinosaur, or something like, whoa, so it's intuition, and it's using the body. So this is also what I was telling some filmmakers yesterday about the difference between film and, let's say, VR, or the more active embodied things like. So and the experience of you've just seen a film and you the lights go on and you're like, where's my coat? What's my name? What city am I in? You know, you've been hypnotized by the film. You've been in the film. You've been all the people in the film. You're like, you don't know who you are anymore. So, and this is a really intense experience, but your body is gone. And so I like to work in visual experiences in which you use your body. You need your body. VR, you have to look behind. It's behind you. It's above you. You need your hands to do this. You know, you're doing stuff. So I was just curious about, and I'd like to hear from you too about where you see this going. Do you see this going into more physical? Visual experiences of the things that come from gaming, and a lot of people who want to have a very immersive visual experience of going in and doing stuff. The reason actually that I started to do VR was because it was all based on shooting, and it was aiming and speed and agility. And so I wanted to make something for kids particularly, where they didn't shoot stuff, but they would fly and they would do other things that you needed skill and dexterity and speed to do, and you know, but that you wouldn't be practicing to kill people, people. So, you know, anyway, and as it turns out, for those couple of pieces, you know, the major people who were the best at it were 10-year-old boys. They were my best audience for that because they were really good. They were really fast at it, you know. And boys can be so, you know. And so I tried to make something for them that would be scary and where they didn't have to shoot it. They would just do something else, you know. Because I think it's. That was my secret motto. I mean, my official model was making virtual reality because blah, 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 you know. But no, really, it was for 10-year-old boys, and who I really like a lot, actually. They have no agenda except to, you know, do this like that.
Okay, I think we have a few minutes for a few questions from the audience. So. Ok. Un microfono lì. Ok. Là dietro.
Hello, Laurie. I'm here.
Oh, okay.
Nobody sees me.
Over there.
Yeah, I have a question about the creative process, and I'm wondering how. Is it something that has to incubate? Like you have an idea, you get these different ideas, and then all of a sudden you end up with you understand that how can I say that? When you have a goal or you have an intuition. And it starts sort of builds up into something that you know that is complete, or it's something that evolves, or how do you get to understand when your creativity has brought to something that is finished, that is complete? Did you understand?
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you. I'm not sure I know how to say when things are complete. I think I've never completed something. When you're asking that, I was like, oh, did I ever finish anything? I stopped working on a lot of things, and then they were done. But I'm not sure that I ever thought that's done. Whoa, you know. I think, and maybe that's because I'm afraid to finish things. Probably, you know. I'm sure some of you know that phenomenon too, that if you finish something, then you know it's like it's too dramatic, and then you won't be able to start anything else anyway, so that it's you see it as a flow instead. When I did a big exhibition in Washington DC that just finished, and it included a lot of things going way back to some early things that I did with with film and photography from the 70s, and I was looking at that, and I realized, wow, that's the same idea that I had over there, and then just recently, and I thought, some people would call that a thread that goes through your work. Other people would say, you haven't had a new idea in 50 years, you know? So I kind of think both are true, because, you know, you tend to, I'm sure you know, like get fascinated with certain aspects of the world or imagery, and they tend to show up in your work in various guises, or maybe in the same guise. So I think, is that called incubation, or is it called repetition? Is it called, you know, fascination? I think it's a little bit of all of those things, and there are a lot of things that I keep trying to solve, and they're always in the back of my mind going, if I could only do that, if I could only do that, and then sometimes, oh, there's a way to do that. And so I keep those back there, and then sometimes when I see something in the world, it brings it to the foreground, and I can think of a better way to not solve it, but let's say put it into another material. And so yeah, I do see it though as a kind of problem solving. I do, and ways to make structures that seem at least coherent, if not complete. You know, they things with beginnings and ends are becoming more suspect to me, and so the next work that I'm doing has much more to do with that, of a different way of describing how time rolls, and yeah. So thank you for that.
Hello.
Hello.
I saw Heart of a Dog the third time here, and you made an introduction saying that it consists of short stories. And I just want to know, how much is it fictional and how much is it biographical? Especially at the end, this is a very impressive thing with the diving for a brother and things like that.
With the dying what?
Diving.
Oh, diving, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This was an autobiographical film, actually. It was kind of like essays, I thought, of short stories. They are things from my life, and so I didn't really. And they were also about phenomenon, like how do you see, like what happens when you close your eyes, and so it was a kind of concoction of a lot of little speculative stories, and it was stories about information, it was stories about fear, and about love, and so I just used my own life, since I know that better than other lives, as incidents, let's say, in this weaving together of little bits of information and autobiographical things, yeah. And it was nominally featuring my dog and Lullabelle, and it was when I saw it recently, I really was struck by the image of her playing the piano, and I should say that I didn't want a piano-playing dog necessarily, you know, just to be clear. But when Lullabelle went blind, she froze, you know, and she couldn't do anything. She couldn't make her way to the food bowl. You had to pick her up to take her to the food bowl, to pick her up to take her out. Her whole world was vision. Her whole thing was, you know, now dogs do not have very good eyesight, really. It's not very good. They're excellent hearing, and, you know, and in an exquisite sense of smell. That's how they navigate. So they don't really need the eyes, but she did, because she loved people. And she would recognize people, and she would, you know. So when that was gone, everything was gone. And so I talked to the dog trainer, and I said, I'm desperate. She's not moving. And the dog trainer said, well, I taught my dogs to play piano. I was like, good for you. I mean, what do you mean? And she said, I could teach Lolabelle to play the piano. I was like, okay. So we set up like little keyboards and mics and little bells and stuff. And she learned to play the piano. And she played a lot of, I set it up so she's using a lot of my programs, so she's, had a little step up. And and she would give a concert every day at noon. She'd run in and turn everything on with her paws, and she would play. And people would come, oh, Lolabelle, oh, look at a dog is playing, oh my God. And her love of people was that, so people came to hear her play. And so really, music saved her life. And I could say that a lot of musicians would say the same thing, But because it was social, and because dogs have this incredible way of creating and living in empathy with other creatures. So that was so that was the story of. So I wanted to somehow tell the story from a little bit from a dog's point of view, but I kind of failed from that point of view. But it really is about her spirit, really, and her sense of needing to be with fellow creatures.
I think we have time for a final question. So.
Hello. What's performing for you? It's all about communication, connectivity with the audience, or something else? Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Probably a combination of those things, because, I'm not trying to make something like brand new that will surprise you and go, whoa, a new kind of plaid. Wow, I never thought of that. It's more like I'm happiest if somebody says, hey, I had that exact same idea. It's just a little like 10 degrees different, but I know what you're talking about. I know what you're talking about. That's a thrill to me when people know what I'm talking about, and they kind of go, and it let's call it resonance, and then they've had the same experience. They are maybe thinking about it a slightly different way, and maybe will shift a little bit, in thinking about, or in a discussion like this, shift it, kind of go, oh, what do I really think about that? That's how I like to when I go to hear somebody speak or be I like to have my mind shifted a little bit around. So that's what I'm going for, is to just communicate a similar thing, And I know some artists want to make something unheard of, that has never been invented before. And that's not my goal. And also, self-expression is not my goal. Like telling you who I am. I don't care if you know me. It's maybe nice if we were friends, but I'm not trying to, in my work, tell you about myself. Really, I'm trying to kind of go, look at that cloud over there, or and then you just kind of go, oh yeah, that's so that's kind of what I'm going for. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Possiamo prendere un'altra? Finito? Okay, sorry for other people queuing, but time's up. And thank you so much for your generosity and your time and being here with us. Oh, wow. Non volevo fare gesti
Thank you. Laurie, can you look at me, please? He's an artist like you. He's from 53. He was from 53. Thank you, Laurie. Bye.
The speech is like from Buddhist time, so I'm a Buddhist, so